1968 marked the beginning of one of the most infamous killing sprees in American history. For 2 years, Northern California was terrorized by a series of seemingly random murders. But it wasn't just the killings that terrorized people. It was the fact that the killer taunted the police and the media through a series of cryptic letters sent to newspapers. Over 50 years later, the case still hasn't been closed and remains one of the most notorious unsolved crimes in American history. Learn more about the Zodiac Killer, what we know, and speculation surrounding the murders on this episode of Everything Everywhere Daily. This episode is sponsored by Quince. As the weather cools here in Wisconsin, I'm swapping in the pieces that actually get the job done, that are warm, durable, and built to last. And Quince delivers every time, with wardrobe staples that'll carry you through the season. I've told you before about my duvet cover, my blanket, and my black cashmere sweater that I all got on Quince, all of which will be helping me get through this fall and winter. Quince has the kind of staples you'll actually want to wear and repeat, like classic fit denim and real leather and wool outerwear that looks sharp and holds up. By partnering directly with ethical factories and top artisans, Quince cuts out the middleman to deliver premium quality at half the cost of similar brands, and sometimes with even bigger discounts. Layer up this fall with pieces that feel as good as they look. Go to quince.com/daily for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/daily. Free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/daily. This episode is sponsored by Uncommon Goods. The holidays are sneaking up fast, but it's not too early to get your shopping done and actually have fun with it. Uncommon Goods makes holiday shopping stress-free and joyful, with thousands of one-of-a-kind gifts that you can't find anywhere else. Uncommon Goods looks for products that are high quality, unique, and often handmade or made in the USA. Many are crafted by independent artists and small businesses, and because they're made in small batches, the best finds can sell it fast. Uncommon Goods has something for everyone. From moms and dads to book lovers, history buffs, and diehard football fans to foodies and mixologists, you'll find thousands of new gift ideas that you won't find anywhere else. I've been looking for a charcuterie board for ages, and I finally found one that I like on Uncommon Goods. So shop early, have fun, and cross some names off your list today. To get 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/daily. That's uncommongoods.com/daily for 15% off. Don't miss out on this limited time offer. Uncommon Goods. We're all out of the ordinary. On the evening of December 20th, 1968, a motorist was driving on Lake Herman Road in Benicia, California, a desolate area in Solano County known for being a lover's lane. As he was driving by, the motorist made a grisly discovery. On the road was a station wagon with a bullet hole piercing the back of the vehicle. Next to it lay two teenagers, one already deceased from a gunshot wound, and the other still alive, but with a gunshot wound to the head, which would later prove to be fatal. Later, the bodies would be identified as Betty Lou Jensen and David Arthur Faraday, both of whom were still in high school. The pair had only known each other for 2 weeks. These two murders would mark the first of several murders committed by one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, the Zodiac Killer. The next time the Zodiac Killer would strike was roughly 6 months after the first killings on July 4th, 1969. These murders also occurred in Solano County, California, just 4 miles away from the original crime. This time, the murders occurred in Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, California, another remote area. The two victims, Michael Renaud Majot and Darlene Farron, were sitting in Farron's car when they noticed another vehicle arrive. The vehicle left for a bit and then returned. The vehicle parked behind Farron's car and a man stepped out, approached the passenger side of the vehicle, and fired 5 rounds into the car. After firing, the man walked away for a short period of time before returning and firing 2 more shots into each victim. The 2 victims were left to die as the assailant drove off. Fortunately, 3 teenagers would enter the parking lot just a few minutes later, see the wounded couple, and go to get help. When the police arrived, both victims were rushed to the hospital. Farron was pronounced dead on arrival, but Majot survived. Majot did his best to help investigators piece together what happened that night, and also described what the attacker looked like. He described the assailant as white and heavy-set, estimating his weight to be between 195 and 200 pounds. He said that the attacker was around 5'8", had curly light brown hair, a larger face, and wore dark clothing. Later that evening, the police received a phone call from a man claiming to be the killer. This call was placed from a payphone just 2 blocks away from police headquarters. The call was brief and simply reported the double murder that had occurred that night, what weapon was used to shoot them, and confessed to the previous murders of Jensen and Faraday. Zodiac would be thrust into the public eye on August 1, 1969, when the Vallejo Times, San Francisco Chronicle, and San Francisco Examiner newspapers received letters from someone claiming to have committed the attacks on Majot and Farron, as well as Jensen and Faraday. Accompanying each letter was a cryptogram which combined into a 408-character cipher. The writer claimed that the cipher would reveal their identity and demanded that the cipher codes be printed on the front page of each of the newspapers. A reply letter was then published by the Vallejo police chief, who claimed that they weren't confident that the letter was sent by the killer and that he should send more facts to prove that he did in fact commit the crimes. A few days after being published, the Examiner received another letter identifying himself as Zodiac. In this letter, he also wrote a much longer piece giving more details about the killings while simultaneously referring detectives back to the letter. Despite the Zodiac's claims, the message didn't reveal his identity, but instead explained the Zodiac's worldview. In this letter, he claimed that killing people is, quote, so much fun, was, quote, a thrilling experience, and that he would be born, quote, reborn in paradise, and that all the people he killed would be his slaves in the afterlife. The Zodiac's next confirmed murder would take place in September of 1969 when 2 college students, Brian Harnell and Celia Shepard, were attacked while having a picnic at Lake Berryessa. While eating, the 2 of them noticed a man watching them from behind a nearby tree. He soon approached them wearing clip-on sunglasses, a black executioner's hood, and a bib with the white Zodiac symbol on it. The man approached the 2 of them with a gun and claimed that he needed a car as he had killed a guard and needed money to travel out of the country. Zodiac then had Shepard bind Hartnell before stabbing them, with Hartnell being stabbed 6 times and Shepard 10. After stabbing the duo, the Zodiac would hike up the road, leaving footprints behind for investigators. The trail led to Hartnell's car, where he wrote his symbol and a message on the door. Meanwhile, the 2 victims' screams were heard by a fisherman and his son, who quickly went to get help. They were tended to by the park rangers until the police and ambulance arrived. Shepard was still awake by the time officers had arrived and managed to give a detailed description of the attacker. She would later die from the wound she suffered, but Hartnell survived. While investigating the scene, people reported seeing a suspicious man in the area who was described as heavy-set and roughly 6 feet tall. The description and witness sketch matched Shepard and Hartnell's reported accounts. Zodiac then left the area and drove 27 miles away from the crime scene. There he used a payphone to call the police about the murder. Zodiac had left the phone on when leaving the scene, so investigators were able to track the phone and lift a palm print from it. The final confirmed Zodiac murder took place just 2 weeks after the Lake Berryessa attack. On October 11, 1969, at roughly 9:40 p.m., the Zodiac Killer hailed a cab driven by Paul Stein in downtown San Francisco. The Zodiac rode in the cab to Presidio Heights, where he shot Stein in the head before taking his keys and wallet. The crime was witnessed by 3 teenagers who quickly called the police department. As they called, the Zodiac was still in the cab, wiping down the vehicle. As the kids had a good look at the Zodiac, they described to the police that the murderer was a husky white man wearing a dark or black jacket. The police responded quickly to the call, but the dispatcher mistakenly reported that the shooter was black, not wearing a black jacket. While on the way to the crime scene, they would encounter a man who looked similar to the teenager's description. They pulled the man to the side and asked if he had seen anyone looking suspicious. The man said he did and pointed them to the east. These 5 murders make up the official list of Zodiac victims. There are numerous other murders that are possibly connected to the Zodiac Killer. The murderer himself claimed to have killed 37 people. It's difficult for authorities to connect any more cases to the Zodiac murders because of the various methods of murder and the differing locations. One of the most notable aspects of the Zodiac Killer case was the multiple instances of the murderer corresponding with and taunting law enforcement. From 1969 to 1974, the Zodiac sent multiple letters and cryptograms to both law enforcement and media outlets. These letters were plagued by poor spelling and were signed with his symbol. His first letters were the previously mentioned one sent in August of 1969. He would continue corresponding with the police throughout the year, sending messages in both November and December. The letter he sent in November contained a 340-character cryptogram where he essentially describes not being fearful of death because he will be in paradise sooner. This cryptogram wasn't solved until the year 2020. His next cryptogram was sent in April of 1970. This letter essentially said, quote, "My name is," with a 13-character cipher. As of the recording of this episode, this cipher has not been solved. His next cipher was sent in June of 1970, where Zodiac sent a letter complaining that nobody was wearing Zodiac buttons, something that was requested in a separate non-cryptogram letter. As punishment, the Zodiac claimed to have shot a man and buried a bomb. To find the bomb, detectives would need to decrypt his 32-character cipher. The cipher has never been decoded, nor has a bomb ever been found. Another notorious letter was sent in the months after the murder of Paul Stine. This letter was not a cryptogram, but was sent to confirm that he was the murderer and that he had watched the San Francisco Police Department search for him. A later letter, also referencing Paul Stine, stated that he was questioned by police just minutes after he had murdered Stine. This was also sent with a piece of the shirt that he was wearing. This letter was also famous for its threat to shoot the tires of a school bus and murder the children as they left the vehicle. Correspondence between Zodiac and the media and police would continue through 1974, although there was a 3-year break after 1971. Reasons as to why the correspondence was paused are theorized to this day. Despite years of taunting law enforcement and the media, the Zodiac Killer has never been caught. Thousands of people have been suspected of being the killer over the years. Obviously, I can't go into every suspect on this episode, but I am going to name a few and go through some of the compelling evidence that may point to them being the murderer. The first suspect, and arguably the most notable, was the only Zodiac suspect to be publicly identified and given search warrants by the police, Arthur Lee Allen. Allen was in the Navy until 1959 before becoming an elementary school teacher. Allen was suspected of being the Zodiac Killer after the death of Sherry Jo Bates, an 18-year-old college freshman. Bates was stabbed to death in 1966, and there were suspicions that the case may have been done by the Zodiac Killer. After Bates died, 2 letters were sent to the police. These letters were said to have been written on a Royal typewriter, the exact type of typewriter Allen had in his home. Additionally, Allen was identified by Zodiac victim Michael Mageau as the man who had shot him and Darlene Ferrin. He was also seen by police wearing a Zodiac symbol on his watch, and when he was interviewed after the Lake Berryessa attack on Brian Harnell and Celia Shepard, he had bloody knives in his possession. For many, another damning piece of evidence against Allen was the fact that he was arrested in 1974 for child molestation, the same time the Zodiac letters to the press ended. Despite circumstantial evidence, Allen has never been confirmed to be the Zodiac Killer. And the reason why he was never confirmed to be the Zodiac Killer is that there's plenty of evidence pointing to someone else. At the crime scene and on the Zodiac letters, fingerprint and DNA evidence was found. Allen's DNA and fingerprints didn't match. The composite sketch of the Zodiac Killer also didn't match. Additionally, when handwriting analysis was completed against Allen and the Zodiac, Allen was ruled out as a suspect. Finally, when a bloody handprint was taken from the scene of the murder of Paul Stine, it was found that Allen's didn't match. Another major suspect in the Zodiac murders was identified in Gary L. Stewart's novel, The Most Dangerous Animal. In this book, Stewart claims that his father, Earl Van Best, was the Zodiac Killer. Much of Stewart's claims deal with circumstantial evidence. He claimed that his father had an uncanny resemblance to the police sketch and pointed to handwriting matches, partial fingerprint matches, messages within the Zodiac letters, and partial DNA matches that proved his father was the Zodiac Killer. However, many of Stewart's claims were disproven during an FX network documentary series. During the series, producers hired a private investigator who found that Stewart had manipulated police reports and found that Van Best was in Europe when the Zodiac was active. Additionally, the DNA, fingerprint, and handwriting evidence were also discredited. This made Stewart's claim and the idea that Van Best was the Zodiac Killer highly unlikely. The final major suspect is Gary Francis Post. Post was presented as a suspect in 2021 by a group called the Casebreakers. This group was made up of roughly 40 people who were former law enforcement and military intelligence workers, journalists, and academics. Once again, the case for Post being the Zodiac Killer is mostly circumstantial, and the FBI and law enforcement are skeptical of whether their findings are correct. Post had a long history of violence. He had broken his wife's pelvis after pushing her into a wall and allegedly attempted to attack a male relative with a hammer. Additionally, Post allegedly had a cult-like following of men whom he trained to be, quote, killing machines. One of the main pieces of evidence the Casebreakers claimed pointed to Post being the Zodiac Killer was his forehead scars. But it should be noted that no witness ever described the Zodiac Killer as having forehead scars. The Casebreakers had other claims which pointed to Post being the Zodiac. This included the two having the same shoe size, and that if they were to retest DNA evidence found at the Bates murder, which was never confirmed to be from the Zodiac Killer, it would match Post. Post has been a public figure in the Zodiac Killer case prior to the Casebreakers as well. News anchor Dale Julin had been claiming that Post was the Zodiac Killer since 2014. Julin claimed to have interviewed Post in 2017, where Post allegedly admitted to being the Zodiac. Julin also claimed that he used the anagrams from the Zodiac newspapers to find the tree where Post allegedly murdered another victim, Donna Lass. Although the Zodiac Killer hasn't been caught, that doesn't mean that it will never happen. Modern developments in the field of forensics have renewed hope for investigators that they will one day be able to finally unmask the killer. Specifically, DNA matching through genealogy is a tool investigators are hopeful will help solve the murders. Regardless, the Zodiac Killer remains one of the most notorious cases in American history, due not just to the murders, but to the public spectacle surrounding them. The executive producer of Everything Everywhere Daily is Charles Daniel. The associate producers are Austin Oetken and Cameron Kieffer. Research and writing for this episode was provided by Olivia Ash. My big thanks go to everyone who supports the show over on Patreon. Your support helps make this podcast possible. And I also want to remind everyone about the community groups on Facebook and Discord. This is where everything happens that's outside of the show. As always, if you leave a review on any major podcast app or in the above community groups, you too can have it read on the show.